Welcome to the Homeschool Show from North Carolinians for Home Education. Our goal is to help you homeschool with confidence and joy. I'm your host, Matthew McDill, and we have back in the studio as our co-host, John Lewis.
Hello,
It's
good
great to
day.
see ya.
It's good to see you.
Glad you can make it to this episode.
Sorry, I couldn't make it last time. Oh, you ready for a dad
I'm
joke?
ready for a dad
All
joke.
right, so why don't pirates take a bath before they walk the plank?
Tell me.
Why would they? They're just going to wash up on shore later.
All right. Ding. Nice.
Awesome. You want another one? Let's see.
You got one?
How do you stop bulls from charging?
Tell me.
Cut up their credit cards.
Okay.
There you go.
Use these at home.
All right.
Tell us about the show.
Today's show is brought to you by Unfunny Dad Jokes. And we're going to talk about the homeschool news today. And we're also going to listen to 2 homeschool conversations and then share some homeschool tips of the week as we discuss those. And so first, we're going to listen to a conversation from Dr. Brian Ray, the founder of the National Home Educational Research Institute. And then we're going to discuss this tip: take advantage of the most effective educational strategies that home education provides. And then we're going to see a conversation with Joyce Berges, founder of the National Black Home Educators, and discuss this tip: spend one-on-one time with your kids.
That's right. So we're going to dive right into Homeschool Conversations Part 1 with Dr. Brian Ray. I was able to sit down with him at a Homeschool Leaders Conference and have this conversation. So let's take a listen. In light of the potential threats, the research that you're doing, what should homeschool parents be doing in light of seeing our cultural landscape and things that are going on?
The main thing that home educating parents should do is a good job. Just enjoy your children, relax. Remember that one of the beauties of parent-directed, home-based education is the freedom that you have to do what is best for each of your children individually and for your family as a whole. That is one of the most amazing benefits of home-based education. You see, if I talk about homeschooling with some people, I try to leave out the H word, the homeschool word. Mm-hmm. And I just say, hey, let's talk about different elements of education. So you say you talk with a certified teacher, a classroom teacher, almost anybody who's attended school. When did children normally learn more? In a group of 29 with one teacher, or in smaller groups, like 2, 3, 4, 5 children with one adult? And almost everybody will say, well, of course, the smaller groups. When did children learn more? When you take a shotgun approach and you throw out a pedagogical angle and curriculum that tries to cover 29 children at once, or when you sort of customize it, individualize it to each child's strengths, relative weaknesses, and dreams and desires. And well, everybody knows it's more the customization that works better. I mean, what do you do in a public school if a child has, quote, special needs? You have an IEP, an individualized education program. And then I say, well, when do children usually learn more? If you have a flexible kind of learning environment or a very rigid one all the time? Well, flexible, of course. You know, when do children learn more? If you can stop for the teachable moment, like when the red-breasted booby lands on the windowsill and you can look up the bird in the field guide and talk about its nest and how many eggs in a clutch. Or when you say, no, we can't talk about that bird because we've got to finish the curriculum. Well, yeah, I mean, that's...
And these are things
all
that
these
people
things,
wouldn't disagree,
right.
Disagree on, right?
Almost nobody does. I've gone over this with certified teachers, professors of education, people like you and me. I'm assuming you were institutionalized for school.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I mean, almost everybody kind of knows this. And so that's why I say, leave out the H word and just talk about education and what works well for children. And we didn't even get to, what about a safer environment or one where you're probably going to be bullied today, or there's a lot of anxiety going on and people don't know what the government's going to do next about X or Y regulation. So really, I think parents need to remember that and not get sucked into the idea that if I homeschool, I'm new, I'm thinking about homeschooling, or I'm a veteran of 10 years, Do not get sucked into the idea that you have to take an institutional school and stick it in your home. Don't do that in your head. You have to think, talk with people, read, pray. You almost have to free your mind of the institutional model, in a sense, to enjoy homeschooling and for your children to enjoy it while you're enjoying it. Because otherwise, I don't like to use this term, stressed out. Stress out, stress out, stress out.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. So I think do a good job, interact with other homeschool people, try to have at least one or two veteran homeschoolers in your life who are open or creative and help you get encouraged, be around in person with other families, whether it's a cooperative or whether it's field trips or whether it's soccer, whatever it happens to be. Be engaged as a human. God made us to have human interaction, human relationship. That's how He designed us. Do those things. And remember, your children are each individuals. And it's a myth that all the kids at government public schools study calculus and remember it until they're 90 years old. Forget that myth.
I always love talking to Dr. Ray,
Yeah, he's great.
and you can learn more about what he does and all the important research and statistics that he puts out at nheri.org. We're going to slide right into our first homeschool tip of the week. So this is part one. What's that going to be?
Our first tip is take advantage of the most effective educational strategies that home education provides.
And so we're going right off of what Brian said.
Yeah,
He's already
absolutely.
explaining why is it effective to educate in these ways that we were just talking about. And homeschool provides that context, right?
Yeah.
One of the things he said is do not stick institutional school in your home. So you were an institutional teacher, weren't you?
I was. I
your
was
thoughts on-
institutionalized for many
then you
years,
institutionalized more.
and then I institutionalized others. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm encouraged. I like the way that he approached that, where he said, don't talk about the H word, the homeschool. He's talking about best educational practices. We talked about that on a previous episode too. Best practices oftentimes in educational psychology and the things that we learned as budding educators in the college programs, most of the time the research did not match what we actually did in the classroom. Take, for instance, the research shows that smaller chunks of information spread out over longer periods of time creates better retention. And then what did we do? We moved from a 7-period day model years ago to a block scheduling model. Those kids are in 4 classes, and they're in there for a semester instead of 7 classes for the full year.
Okay, interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's one example of how the institutional school can actually be maybe harmful to the students. And then the other thing is they were constantly, over the years, you have to remember that I came up in the public education system, and then I was a product of that, North Carolina Teaching Fellow Scholar, and then back into the public school system as a teacher. And I watched this happen across my education and then my training as an educator and then my experience as an educator for 10 years. And I noticed that the curriculum, they continually pressed the curriculum down into lower and lower grade levels. So that, whereas in years past, this was a requirement in math for 10th graders in such and such class, and now they're pushing it down and they're teaching it in the 5th grade for the first time the kids see it. And I think that, their thought was somehow that the kids seeing it earlier was going to help them. But the problem was what they didn't get to focus on is basic math skills without a calculator. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, thinking, estimating, that sort of thing, looking at just basic mathematics skills. So then I had high school students that after they met the requirements, they had to have another math, but they weren't ready to go on to the pre-calculus and all that sort of thing. So they took something called technical math. And what did we do in technical math? We talked about decimals and fractions, and I mean a
went
lot
back
of that.
and did-
And then some application of
yeah.
basic math stuff like percentages and fractions and that sort of thing. So it's really interesting.
Inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Well, and let's look at these three things, especially as a teacher and now with home educating your kids. These
Yeah.
three items that he mentioned. One is more attention from the teacher. You have
Right.
less students, more attention. It's pretty basic. You don't have to do research to figure out that that's
Yeah.
going to be a more
Yeah.
effective situation. I think the best one that we've talked about so much here is customization and individualization in the sense that you have some students who are ready to go very quickly in math, or some really, really struggling. In my house, with my 6 students who are still at home, they're all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Another thing that we've done is we've had to change our math curriculum, where it's this just isn't working, you know? And we get to decide, we're going to switch it up.
And
Or this kid's going to do this one, and this kid's going to do this one.
I just did that recently with my son. And so here he is in the 10th grade, and we're towards the end of the year, and I'm like, nope, this doesn't work. We're doing something different. And you know, as a math teacher, I feel confident that I can handle that, right?
Sure.
But as a parent, nobody knows your child better than you do. Nobody cares about your child more than you do. So why would you not be able to have that confidence in your ability to make that decision as well? I think that's one of the powerful things about the homeschool opportunity.
And I love being also able to tap into individualized interests, especially as they get into high school, right? Because they have stuff they love to do. They have things they want to study.
Yeah.
And so, you know, right now I have my high school kids doing research and writing on very, very specific items that they want to do research on. In fact, I had my 2 boys who are now graduated, their senior years looked very different because one was kind of headed toward a seminary ministry direction and the other was headed toward law enforcement.
Okay.
And so I let them create a lot of their papers, a lot of their research, even some of their classes on where they were headed. You know, my seminary bound guy was already writing sermons and doing theological papers because that's what he was interested in.
Right.
You know, but you can't, you know, that kind of flexibility isn't there as much, right, in the institutional setting.
Yeah, and then you have some situations. I have a student right now that when you're talking about developing writing skills, that becomes a struggle because they're just so afraid they're going to make mistakes or they're not going to do it correct or it's not going to be good enough. And so I switched them to a journal format and let's just get used to writing and get comfortable with it. Yeah. And well, now I don't know what to write. I have freedom to write on anything. And so we actually printed out a bunch of different prompts and cut them on slips, cut out little slips of paper, put them in a jar and said, just pull one out of the hat and there you go. That's what you do.
It doesn't matter
today.
what you write. You just got to write.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the other thing, too, is that we have the freedom to focus on skills.
Yeah.
Learning skills like writing, communicating, critical thinking, research.
Yeah.
Those are the things that allow the student to learn for the rest of their lives.
Yes.
As opposed to you have to know XYZ knowledge and pass a test to say that you've learned X, which you may or may not remember later. Right.
Well, so, I mean, I mean, for some roles, yeah, but in a lot of job situations, how many people need to be able to write a 3-point persuasive paper? Right? But they do need to be able to compose emails that communicate very clearly and very clearly and very quickly. They need to be able to produce, an email. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
It's too good not to notice. So here's what we're trying to say, just like Dr. Brian Ray. Homeschool gives you the opportunity to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so don't miss it by trying to be like, I got to do it like the school.
Yeah, exactly.
Maximize the flexibility that you have, right?
Yes.
All right, let's check out the next conversation.
Yeah, so next conversation, Matthew sat down with Joyce Berges, who's the founder of the National Black Home Educators Organization, and this was at the HSLDA Leaders Conference. So let's listen in on that conversation.
As a parent, as a homeschool parent, can you just give what's on your heart for those parents, just words of encouragement or advice?
Absolutely. You know, I would just say to parents, raise the children that you want to spend time with as adults. That was one of my philosophies. I was just determined that I didn't want my children. You know, Jesus said in the scriptures, he said that I pray that they all be one. And further on in that scripture, you're going to read where Jesus said, I've not lost any, but the one who was supposed to be lost, so to speak. But Jesus knew the power of one, the power of gathering. And so I would encourage parents to gather your children together, have prayer time, read scripture, love your children, you know, have tea time with them. Just make sure that you spend that time, that you pour yourself into your children. Susanna Wesley is one of my heroes, and she had all those children. And I grew up Methodist, and John Wesley was, of course, one of her children, and she spent Thursday nights, which was when Bible study in the Methodist church was on a Thursday night. And so Susanna Wesley had a day that she spent with all of her children. Now, of course, she had more children than the days of the week, but she would spend maybe mornings with John and maybe afternoons with Charles. And so just spending that one-on-one time with each child is so important because, once again, raise the children that you want to spend time with as adults. And then the next thing I would tell parents is don't be afraid to parent. You know, I remember when I first started homeschooling my children, I was thinking, oh, these 5 kids are going to gang up on me. They're going to say, Mama, you know, who do you think you are? You're not a teacher. You're not like my teacher or something like that. But I had to take hold of myself and say, you know what? God gave these babies to me, and intuitively, spiritually, physically, I'm the only one who has a vested interest in my children, for good or for bad. I'm going to suffer that. If it's for good, I'm going to rejoice in that. But God has promised that in Proverb 31 that the woman who does these things does not need to have a fear of a future, but she can smile at her future. And then I guess the last thing would be to make sure that you pour good things into your children between the age of 1 and 10. Those are such tender years and such pivotal years that God has allowed us that space to really pour into our kids. There's another scripture, I think it's in Isaiah chapter 7. I'm not sure of the verse, it may be verse 15, but it says that the child was fed butter and whey, meaning the child was fed the absolute best. He was fed the purest of things. He was given the best. Give your children the absolute best that you can give them. No, we're a one-income family, so I couldn't take my children to the Ritz-Carlton, you know, to have dinner. Or I couldn't take them to the most fantastic restaurant in my city. But what we did do in our home, spending time with each child, we would get a white tablecloth at the table and get the best that we could give them as a meal. Have tea time. Spend that time. Give your children the best. Give them the best as it relates to food. Give them the best that you can as it relates to education. Give them the best of who you are. And then it says the child was fed butter and whey. They received the best. So that when they're older, it says in time. The child was fed butter and whey. So in time, they will know how to choose the good and refuse the evil. And I have seen that in all of my adult children. You know, they're not perfect. None of us is perfect. But 99% of the time, 98%, and I think raising children and having a 90% rate that they're going to give you a reason to smile at your future, those are good odds.
That's great.
And it's worth it to homeschool your kids, to spend that time with them.
Thank you, Joyce.
It's my
Thank
pleasure.
you for
It is my pleasure.
your ministry and what you're doing and getting to talk together.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to share my heart with so many moms and dads.
Awesome. Well, that was Joyce Berges, and you can find out more about the National Black Home Educators group by and resources that they have at nbhe.net. Very close to our address, nbhe.net.
Right. And so, again, we're just going to talk about some of the things Joyce talked about and focus on one particular item, which our tip for now, right now, is spend one-on-one time with your kids. So that's one thing that she said to do. And that can be a real challenge. It can be a challenge for some of us if you have a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
But even if you don't, it's very busy. Mm-hmm. They're busy. We're busy. Yeah. And it takes energy and it takes time and intentionality. And so it's one of those things that if you don't try to do, it doesn't necessarily happen. I want to start by thinking about young kids. I still have I have 8-year-old is my youngest. So I still kind of have, I feel like a pretty young one who just this week, for example, would come up and say, Dad, come out to the shed. I want to show you my rock collection.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have time to look at the rock collection. I've seen rocks, you know, but I've just made a commitment, you know, that if I haven't put myself in my office with the door shut, I'm going to look at the rock collection, you know. Dad, let me tell you about this race for these cars I just did. So the point is, I've made a commitment and I listen to my kids when they want to tell a story.
Yeah.
I look at their stuff when they're little.
Yeah, don't you find that hard, though? I mean, so for me, what I want to be careful of is when I do it, that I don't go, yeah, that's good. Yeah, that looks great. Oh, awesome. Beautiful. Well, have you cleaned your room?
Yeah, that's right.
That's
going to clean this crap up. It's like, exactly. It's true.
What did you do with those clothes on the floor?
Yeah.
You know, it's real easy to do that. And so I've got 7-year-olds, twins. And just when we were on the phone earlier, one of them came up and wanted to show me their picture that they did for school. And I was on the phone, right? And they have no concept, but that's the struggle with little ones, for sure.
But if they feel like, okay, Dad cares, he has time for me, that's the beginning. Because later, it's really important, and we're talking to our teenagers, and we're trying to get them to talk, and they're like, nope, we've passed that part, Dad.
Yeah.
You know, I want to mention a couple of articles here. This is the Greenhouse Magazine 2022 Graduate Edition. Just came out, and I have an article in here called Parenting Adult Children, because I'm talking about parents who are graduating their kids, entering to a different time. And I tell the story about when I wrote this article, the night before I was up till midnight with one of my kids at college. And I didn't really like staying up till midnight on the phone, but I was talking to him. And one of my very favorite seasons of life is to sit down with my older kids, have a cup of coffee or tea or something, and just talk, have real conversation. And we've developed that kind of relationship. They want to talk.
That's good.
And so another great article in here written called Conquering the Dead Space by Derek Carter, who was one of the featured speakers at the conference, right? And he has a whole list of questions. What are 5 things that you like about yourself and 5 things you hate? What is the weirdest and craziest thing you've ever done? If you were granted a wish to become a superhero, which one would it be? And he lists a bunch of questions just to try to have conversation, you know, with your kids, try to get them to open up and share. I want to share a couple other questions, a few questions that I've shared before from Dr. Kathy Cook, who is also one of our featured speakers at the conference.
She's great.
It's awesome. What problems do you want to solve? So you're talking to older children.
Yeah.
They're observing and processing the world.
Yeah.
And they see certain problems. And that tells you a lot about them. It tells them a lot about themselves when they're able to say, what problems do you want to solve? What people groups would you like to serve? What breaks your heart? What brings you joy? I just love some of those that she had mentioned. So those are just some tools for spending time with your kids one-on-one.
Yeah.
But the real challenge is to do it.
Yeah.
To make the time. And so we try to take advantage of rides in the car. We try to take advantage of trips. Sometimes they just come up. Sometimes they don't. However, I find that if you don't intentionally set time aside and make an appointment, a lot of times it really doesn't happen. And so a lot of times I'm texting my kids, when are we going to meet this week? When are you not working? What time do we have? Come down to my office, or we just go have coffee or something. And spending that time with the kids and talking to them, investing in that relationship is such a critical part. Then you have the foundation for discipleship.
Yeah.
The foundation to really talk about the Lord, to really encourage them. And then they'll trust you with their problems, with their questions, with the things they're struggling with. So I love this point that she made about spending one-on-one time with the kids.
Me too, and I think that one thing that I thought of earlier that'll tie both this one and Dr. Ray's conversation together is that what we're talking about today is really that Deuteronomy 6 principle.
That's right.
That we're supposed to instruct our children as we go through life. Every scenario, every situation, we're instructing them. And so home education is not just about academics, right?
I want to mention this before we wrap up.
Yeah.
If you're wondering, how can I get one of those amazing Greenhouse magazines, right? You can be a member of NCHE. You go to nche.com/join. And if you're a member and contribute there, then you will receive 3 of these each year. And it's full of lots of great articles.
They're great.
And stuff.
And that particular issue is especially important because my daughter's picture is in there. She's graduating next week.
Check that out.
Yeah, her bio. Well, guys, we want to thank you for joining us this week. We'd love to hear from you. If you would, please send your questions and your feedback to us. You can reach us at the Homeschool Show at nche.com. Also, don't forget, we want you to share with us your homeschool reality moments. So please visit the website and share with us that information anytime you can, and help others find this show by subscribing and visiting nche.com/the Homeschool Show.